We are here at Back Creek Bridge today. So after leaving Martinsburg, Colonel Campbell stationed Captain Franklin Long's Company G here at Back Creek to guard a stone single-arch bridge. Captain Long's men guarded the easternmost portion of the B&O Railroad assigned to the regiment and constantly faced attacks from Confederates. Following General Stonewall Jackson's successful Valley campaign, General Nathaniel Banks retreated across the Potomac to Williamsport, Maryland. Colonel Campbell's concern for Company G, only 8 miles from Confederate-occupied Martinsburg, Virginia, grew. Colonel Campbell stopped one of the last locomotives leaving Martinsburg and ordered it back to Back Creek Bridge to evacuate his men. The train arrived just in time. After loading the company's camp equipment on the train, the men of Captain Long's company boarded the train just as Confederates advanced. As the train sped away, the Confederates fired a few shots and started to burn Company G's camp. They then set fire to the bridge that the 54th had guarded since March and tore down the telegraph lines. The train picked up the other 54th Pennsylvania companies along the railroad as it sped to South Branch Bridge, almost 60 miles away. During the Antietam campaign, Confederates returned to the area again and constantly threatened Back Creek on their way to and from Maryland. On September 12, 1862, Colonel Campbell formed a small detachment of about 50 men and proceeded on open rail cars to Back Creek. Majority of the Confederate column had already passed Back Creek, but the enemy's rear guard remained. Colonel Campbell determined to push on and make a dash at them. Major Linton led a vanguard of 10 men while the rest of the detachment followed closely behind. After crossing a deep cut made by the railroad, and you can see the deep cut behind us here, a little further down the rail line. So after crossing a deep cut, Major Linton ordered his men to open fire on the Confederates. At the sound of gunfire, Colonel Campbell rushed to the front and surveyed the situation. He ordered Major Linton to hold his line and called for Captain Bonneker to bring up the reserves. Soon the entire detachment advanced, firing on the Confederates. Taken completely by surprise, the Confederates here at Back Creek fled, leaving behind 2 dead, 7 wounded, and 19 prisoners. Colonel Campbell's detachment suffered just 1 casualty when the Confederates captured Sergeant Leonard Long from Company G. 2 days later, the Confederates returned in strength to Back Creek. Colonel Campbell knew his small force could not successfully attack the Confederates, but he also knew he could not just abandon his positions. Colonel Campbell devised a plan to deceive the Confederates. He marched a detachment through a portion of the camp the Confederates could see, then up over a hill out of sight and back around through the camp again, giving the impression of a strong Union force arriving. The deception continued into the evening. On a high rocky ledge overlooking the creek, which you can see in front of us, the detachment placed 3 hollowed-out logs on top of some breastworks. The men wrapped the logs with their gum blankets to make it appear artillery support had also arrived. They continued the deception through the night and into the next morning. The men bored holes into the logs, filled them with gunpowder, and periodically fired them. The ploy worked. Confederates did not move against Back Creek or any of the rail line west of Major Linton's positions. On September 21st, a large Confederate force moved on Company G, still guarding the bridge here at Back Creek. Colonel Campbell kept the train near his headquarters and quickly moved to support his threatened company, picking up elements of his regiment along the way, including Private John Hammer and 40 men from Company B. Before Colonel Campbell arrived with reinforcements, the train broke down. Meanwhile, the Confederates attacked Company G here at Back Creek. The men put up a brief but determined fight before Major Linton ordered a withdrawal. After fixing the train, Private Hammer recalled, "The cars run at the top of their speed, and when we got in sight, we saw our men falling back out of their rifle pits. The sound of the oncoming train stopped the Confederate pursuit and forced them to fall back to their original positions, but not before setting fire to the Back Creek Bridge again." Confederates' overwhelming numbers forced the detachment to take up a defensive position until Union cavalry from the Army of the Potomac arrived on the Maryland side of the Potomac River. Their presence forced the Confederates to withdraw. Colonel Campbell and his detachment moved back towards the bridge and extinguished the fires. Corporal Kaufman looked around and noted, Company G were driven out of their quarters by Jackson's army, lost all their tents and 10 days' rations, and a few boxes of cartridges. Private Augustus Barr noted, the rebels burned their tents and took all of their clothing and commissary stores. Colonel Campbell pursued the Confederates, but finding them in a strong position, fell back here to Back Creek. So thank you for joining us today on this episode of In the Footsteps of the 54th.